São quatro. Mais cimento, né? Eu que faço tudo, passa tudo na minha mão.
Welcome to Destination Eat Drink, the travel channel for foodies. I'm Brent Peterson. We are in Lisbon, Portugal, and we're at a pasteleria called Conde, which is a nice little bakery here in the Santos neighborhood. The Santos neighborhood, which is quickly undergoing gentrification. So there's lots of construction going on here, and we're sitting outside. It's loud out here. So apologize, there's going to be some street noise. I'm trying to project my voice to go over that street noise a little bit, but you're going to hear cars and trucks that are coming over the over my voice, and that's just the way it is. They're coming up the hill. They're going to have to gun the motor. Today I thought we'd do a video about living in Portugal. Karen and I have been living here now for almost 2 years, and get a lot of questions from our friends back home, from folks who listen to the podcast, from people who watch the YouTube channel about what it's like to live here. So I thought today I would do a video about cost of living, what it costs to live here in Portugal. Now, keep in mind that, you know, when you're talking about cost of living, there is a huge variance in the amount that you're going to spend. You know, you could live like a pauper in the middle of nowhere, Portugal, in some rural shack and spend very little. You could live like a king in Lisbon and spend quite a bit. Personally, I think Karen and I live fairly frugally, but of course, we could live much, much more cheaply if we were to make changes to our lifestyle. So I'm going to give you these numbers, but keep that in mind. Your results may vary. Your mileage may vary. So just let's keep that in mind. Now, undoubtedly, the biggest expense. See what I mean about those trucks? They're really loud. They got to hit the gas to get up the hill. Your biggest expense is always going to be housing, right? Unless you buy a home outright in cash and you don't have a mortgage. Karen and I rent. Many of our friends rent. So I've got a fairly good idea of what rents cost. I also try to keep up to date. But with everything, there is a huge variation in housing costs. You could spend as little as 400 euros a month, even less maybe, but you would be living in a shack in the middle of nowhere. You could spend 4,000 euros, even more, live in a penthouse in Lisbon. So that's quite a range, right? I would say for our city, on average, you're looking at maybe between 700 and 1,300 euros a month in Setúbal. That's our city. It's a mid-sized Portuguese city. It's right on the water, and you know, it's very in demand. Housing is very much in demand there. So if you average that out, maybe 1,000 euros a month for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath place in Setúbal. Now, I'm going to be doing a video later in more detail on housing, the different kinds of housing that's available and what you might pay and what you might expect and things of that nature. But for now, let's just say 1,000 euros a month for housing. After that, your next biggest expense is probably going to be food. For us, we definitely spend less on groceries than we did in the United States. And that's because food is generally cheaper here. However, just like in the US, inflation is happening here in Portugal. And I've noticed significant rises in some food prices here. That's to be expected when inflation happens. But right now, I would say we're spending about 400 euros a month. Now, keep in mind, most of our food that we're buying, we're getting from the fresh market. So we're buying fresh produce at the market, and then for staples like rice and pasta, some spices, tomato sauce, canned vegetables for stuff we can't find fresh, oat milk, oats, things like that, go to the grocery store for. But 400 euros a month for 2 people is about what we spend on groceries. After that, you got to think about what dining out costs. And we spend a fair amount on dining out because we're doing videos like these all the time where we're going out and we're sampling places. And plus we're going out just for fun. So between the two of us, I would say we spend maybe 150 a month on food, on dining out. And that probably sounds low to you, but you have to keep in mind, when you are eating out at traditional Portuguese places, neighborhood places, not fancy upscale places in Lisbon, you know, where, like in this neighborhood, there are upscale restaurants that are aimed at tourists and the expat community, and you can spend, you know, 50 bucks, 50 euros per person to eat out. In our town, you know, a lot of times we spend 10 or 15 bucks per person to eat out, and that includes wine. So, you know, when I say 150 euros a month, sounds low, but we're eating out pretty regularly. So you've got 1,000, 400, and 150. So that's 1,550 now on housing and food. Add to that utilities. So we spend about another 150 on utilities. That includes gas, water, and electricity. And in fact, that might be even a little high. I'd say most months it's closer to 100. So now we're up to 1,650. But keep in mind, our utilities are probably a little bit low because we don't have central heat or central AC. We don't often use central heat or we often don't use our portable heater or our portable AC. So our expenses are probably pretty low on that. So 1,650, and then another truck, and then another 70 for telecom. So that's 1,720. 70 includes cell phone, internet, TV, and they throw in a landline, which I don't use, although it does have free calling back to the United States on evenings and weekends. So I could use it, but I usually just use WhatsApp. So now we're up to 1,620. Add on to that health insurance. Now, I'll do another video probably on healthcare later, but suffice it to say that healthcare is free in Portugal to an extent if you use the public system. We have private insurance on top of our public. So for like our regular doctor's appointments and checkups, and you know, if they order blood work and stuff like that, we'll do it through the private hospital. Private health insurance for 2 people is 180. That's for 2 people. If you're buying health insurance in the US, you realize how incredibly inexpensive that is. And that is with no deductible. Now, office visits cost about 15 euros to visit a doctor, maybe 25, maybe 40 to visit a specialist, but it's very inexpensive. So that's 180 a month. So now we're up to 1,800. And then after that, our next biggest expense is transportation. And Karen and I don't have cars, so we just use the public transit. And I'll talk about that in more detail, but suffice it to say that it's 40 euros per person So that's 80, and then maybe another 20 on top of that for Uber. So another 100. Now we're up to 1,900. But suffice it to say, public transport and Uber are very cheap. It's not unusual to get a €3 Uber ride here in Portugal to go, you know, not just going across the street, going a fairly good distance. So there you go. We're up to 1,900. Now you add in some miscellaneous clothing, unexpected expenses. I don't know what else we would spend money on. I guess you'd have to keep in mind that we would have to budget for trips in there as well. So maybe another couple hundred for that per month, you know, for trips, overnight stays and whatnot. So I would say our general budget for a month is about 2,500. You know, that's a good amount. So, you know, what we were spending in the U.S., significantly more than that. You know, I would say from our standpoint, Karen and I have discussed this many, many times, because of where we are in the center of our city, because of the access to what we have, to the people and the friends that we've made here, our quality of life has improved greatly since we've been here. Our health has improved greatly since we've been here. And as you can tell from me adding this up in my head, I assume I got the numbers. I was just adding those numbers in my head. I think I got those numbers right, but you know, I was just doing them in my head. I don't have a piece of paper in front of me. But 2,500 a month, you know, that's pretty good, I would say. And I would say, you know, we're pretty close to the average for what expats are spending. Keep in mind, though, if you're in Lisbon, you will be spending probably significantly more, especially for housing. If you're living in Porto, you're probably going to be spending more. Some places in the Algarve, probably going to be spending more. So that's something to think about. I think it's time. I think I've earned my reward. I did enough math for the day. This is a chocolate salami. It doesn't have real salami in it. It's like a brownie with nuts in it. But I think they call it salami because these little nuts look like little bits of fat like you would see in a salami. So that's what they call it. Little sugar on the outside. Super tasty. I got my abatanado, which is just like an Americano coffee. And I gotta say, I'm going to, you know, at some point I think we're gonna have to come up here and do a video on Santos because there's a lot going on in this neighborhood. It seems like it's changing rapidly before our eyes. So there's hipster places, and there's also classic pastelerias like this place that we're at right now. So, you know, we'll see. What's it going to be like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? These guys are going to still be around. I don't know. I would imagine a lot of places got forced out, but we'll see. That's for a future episode. That's for a future Destination Eat Drink to worry about. For now, I'm going to enjoy this, and we'll talk a little bit more about living in Portugal in just a minute. But let me have my chocolate salami and my coffee for now. This is Rua da Silva in the Santos neighborhood, better known as Green Street. Not sure if it's because of all of the plants on this street, or it's because of the CBD shop that's over here, or if it's because of the pungent aroma of marijuana that I smell right now. But this is another example of how this neighborhood is gentrifying. There's lots of hip, vegan type places here, restaurants and whatnot. And there's still a couple of like traditional apartments with elderly folks living in them. So you got that juxtaposition of those two things right next to each other that's just kind of unusual and kind of very Lisbon. But the thing I wanted to talk about is we're talking about budgets, and one of the things in your budget will have to be transportation. Now, when Karen and I moved here about 2 years ago, we decided we wanted to try living the car-free lifestyle. So we sold our car. I hadn't been without a car in 40 years, something like that. My first time ever really being without a car in my adult life. So I knew it was going to be unusual, but I wanted to give it a try and see how it would be. And I got to say, 2 years later, don't miss driving. Don't miss the expense of gas, of insurance, of maintenance and upkeep, and trying to find a frickin' parking spot. I don't miss any of that stuff. You might be saying, well, how do you get around? We live in a city, Setúbal, that is well connected. And so what we do every month is we buy this, our little Navigant pass. That's our monthly public transport pass. And that covers not only our city of Setúbal, but the entire Lisbon region. From here, from Lisbon, going out to our town of Setúbal, out to Sesimbra, out to, I don't know, all the way north of Lisbon to Sintra, and a lot of other places in between. It's a massive area that we can do unlimited riding. And it covers buses, trains, ferries, subway, even some of the elevators and all of the trams. So all of that stuff is covered. So we just walk into every one of those and just beep, 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 in and out. It's so easy. And it's only 40 euros a month for each of us. So it's a great way to live, really. We are constantly coming to Lisbon. It's usually less than an hour, depending on where we're going. It can be 40 minutes, it can be an hour, depending on where we're going. Lisbon's a big city, so you're traveling around. But today, for instance, we got on a train. From the train, we got off the train, a ferry was waiting for us, hopped on the ferry. 20 minutes later, we're in the heart of Lisbon, walked downstairs to the metro, grabbed the metro. The metro train was waiting for us, hopped on, doors closed, and we got off of the metro, and then we walked about 15 minutes to our final destination. It was so easy, and that's how it is. Because from our city, it doesn't matter. We can take a train or we can take a bus. It doesn't matter, whichever one is quickest, because the metro here in Lisbon is so well connected to the city that it makes it super simple once you get to the city to get to any place you want. Now that said, if you're coming as a visitor to Lisbon, I would say this: get to know the metro system. You're probably going to want to ride the tram because everyone wants to ride the tram as a tourist attraction. Trams, not super efficient, and the buses, they're not great because they are dependent on the traffic here, and the traffic here is bad, and the streets are not great because this is an ancient city. It's the second oldest city in Europe after Athens. So anyway, public transport is fantastic, and we love using it on a daily basis in our city and in the surrounding area. Now, other options that you have, we got lots of friends who brought cars with them, or they bought a car when they're here. And a lot of them live outside of the city center, or they live in a smaller city nearby, and they need a car. If you're thinking of doing it, I would say this: most of my friends that I've talked to who brought their car over from the US regretted it because of the cost of transportation, and then you get taxed when you get here on that car. So you might as well sell the car, pocket that money, and use it towards buying another car when you get here. You're probably better off. Although I have heard some people complain that the selection of cars in Portugal isn't as good as it was back in the United States. And I can understand that. Also keep in mind, you're not going to want to buy a giant SUV here, especially if you're living in a city that's old and has narrow streets. There was just a posting on social media the other day of a car in our city. The road was too narrow and they literally got stuck in the street, both sides. Crunched the car and they were stuck there. That kind of stuff happens. There are places in Lisbon, in Alfama, you walk around and you'll see the scratches in the stone from cars and trucks that have come through there and just couldn't make the turn, couldn't navigate the narrow passageways. So if you want to get a car, that's something to think about. The other part of transportation is walking. We walk everywhere. I walk for exercise and I walk just as part of going to shop for groceries, going to the cafe, going to meet friends, all of that. Karen and I walk on average about 7.5, 8.5 miles a day. I know that sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that includes our exercise for the day when I hike up to the castle in our town. But walkability is really important to me, and it's very easy to get around by walking. In fact, a lot of times it's easier to walk than it is to drive. You can get there quicker just because the roads can be convoluted here. And pedestrians have the right of way, and that is mostly respected by the Portuguese drivers. Some of the older drivers, apparently back in the day, motorists really had the right of way, or at least demanded the right of way. And some of the older drivers I've gotten into confrontations with because I'm in the crosswalk and they're speeding up at me. You know what? I'm not going to back down, but also I'm not going to win against a moving car. So, you know, things can get vocal. But I could count on one hand the amount of times that's happened. Maybe I've done this a dozen times to a driver, like what the heck's going on. But for the most part, people are very respectable of pedestrians. The only other thing that I would say is when it comes to bicycling, I have a lot of friends here who love to bicycle. I had a bike in the States. I used to love to bicycle. For me personally, I don't feel safe in the cities bicycling because there's not a lot of dedicated bike lanes here in Portugal. And the streets are narrow, and I feel like a lot of times Portuguese drivers, even though they respect the right of way, they also drive very fast and, in my opinion, sometimes recklessly. So, me personally, I wouldn't do it. But like I said, I have lots of friends who bike all the time, every day. They love it. They swear by it. That's something that you've got to weigh the pros and cons of. So, I hope you enjoyed this video on budgets for living in Portugal and for transportation. If there's other things that you want me to cover, like there's healthcare and housing and just buying food in general and grocery stores and all that stuff, if there's anything else that you'd like me to cover, just drop it in the comments, like and subscribe, and of course listen to the podcast at destinationeatdrink/pod. I've got tons of great foodie travel guides too at destinationeatdrink.com. Thanks for watching. I'm Brent Peterson. See you down the road.
São quatro, mais cinco, né? Eu que faço tudo, passa tudo na minha mão.
In the morning I was
São quatro. tudo, passa tudo.